When a group of street thugs spot a tattooed black man walking alone at night, they think he's just another target. But Damien Cole isn't who they think he is. Beneath the inked skin lies a retired Marine combat medic, quiet, disciplined, and dangerously skilled. What happens next isn't just a confrontation. It's a powerful lesson in real strength, one that will leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about toughness. The rain fell in relentless sheets over the cobblestone streets of Rotterdam, a port city in the Netherlands where the old world clashed with the new. Neon signs flickered above narrow alleys, casting a sickly glow on the faces of those who called this place home. It was a neighborhood of chipped paint and broken dreams, where the air smelled of salt from the nearby docks and the faint tang of trouble brewing. For the crew that ruled these streets, trouble was both currency and creed. They called themselves the Hounds, 5 young men with sharp eyes and sharper knives, their leather jackets patched with a snarling dog emblem. Led by Koen, a wiry 24-year-old with a shaved head and a scar running down his left cheek, they'd carved out this patch of pipe as their own. To them, anyone who didn't belong was either prey or a threat. Tonight, they'd spotted the latter. He came walking down the alley just past midnight, a tall figure in a black hoodie, hands buried deep in his pockets. The rain plastered the fabric to his broad shoulders, but he didn't hunch against it like most would. He moved with a steady, unhurried gait, his boots splashing through puddles as if the storm were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. In the dim light, they could see the edges of tattoos peeking out from his sleeves, dark ink curling like smoke over his wrists. His skin was a deep brown, a stark contrast to the pale faces that dominated this part of town. To the Hounds, he was an outsider, a target. "Oi, mate!" Koen called out, stepping into the stranger's path. His voice was a jagged blade, cutting through the rain. The others fanned out behind him, Jasper with his brass knuckles, Milo twirling a switchblade, and the twins, Bram and Finn, cracking their knuckles like they were warming up for a brawl. "You lost or something? This ain't your street." The man stopped, his head tilting slightly, as if he were sizing them up. Up close, they could see more of him. A strong jaw, a nose that had been broken at least once, and eyes that held a quiet intensity, like a storm held back by a dam. The tattoos climbed up his neck too. Names, dates, symbols they didn't recognize. He didn't answer right away, just stood there, water dripping from the brim of his hood. "You deaf, Bruin?" Jasper sneered, using a Dutch slur that made the others snicker. "We don't like strangers round here, especially not your kind." The man's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, with an accent that wasn't quite American but carried its weight. "I'm just passing through. No trouble." Koen laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the brick walls. "No trouble? Mate, you're trouble just by breathing here. What's your name, huh? We like to know who we're dealing with." "Damien," the man said simply. "Damien Cole." "Damien Cole," Koen repeated, mocking the rhythm of it. "Sounds like some tough guy from a movie. You think you're hard, Damien? All them tattoos don't mean shit to us." Damien didn't flinch. His hands stayed in his pockets, his posture relaxed. But there was something in the way he stood, feet planted just so, shoulders squared, that made Milo pause, the switchblade stilling in his hand. The twins exchanged a glance, sensing it too. This wasn't some random drifter. This was a man who'd faced worse than a pack of street punks and walked away. "I don't want to fight," Damien said, his tone calm but firm. "Let me pass." Koen stepped closer, his breath fogging in the cold air. You don't get to tell us what to do, Bruin. This is our turf. You want to pass? You pay the toll. He shoved Damien's chest with both hands, hard enough to make most men stumble. Damien didn't budge. His eyes narrowed. Just a flicker. But it was enough to send a chill down Jasper's spine. The shove had been a test, and Damien had passed it without even trying. Koen, though, didn't notice, or didn't care. He grinned, mistaking the silence for weakness. "Big man don't talk much, huh?" Koen said, pulling a knife from his belt. The blade gleamed wet in the rain. "Let's see if we can make you squeal." The hounds tightened their circle, ready for blood. They'd done this before. Roughed up outsiders, sent them running with bruises and a story to tell. It was their game, their rules. But tonight, the rules were about to change. Damien sighed, a sound heavy with something unspoken. "You don't want this," he said, almost to himself. Then louder, "Last chance, walk away." Koen laughed again, but it was forced this time. He lunged, aiming the knife for Damien's ribs, a quick jab meant to teach a lesson. What happened next was a blur. Damien moved like water, fluid and inevitable. His left hand shot out, catching Koen's wrist mid-strike, twisting it until the knife clattered to the ground. With his right, he grabbed Koen's jacket and yanked him forward, off balance. In one smooth motion, he swept Koen's legs out from under him, sending the leader crashing face first into a puddle. It took less than 3 seconds. The hounds froze, mouths open. Koen sputtered, spitting water and blood from a split lip, scrambling to his feet. "Get him!" he roared, pride wounded more than his body. Jasper charged first, swinging his brass knuckles at Damien's head. Damien ducked, grabbed Jasper's arm, and used his momentum to hurl him into Milo. The two collided with a grunt, tumbling into a stack of trash cans. The twins came next, fists flying, but Damien sidestepped Bram and drove an elbow into Finn's gut, dropping him to his knees. Bram swung again, wild and desperate, but Damien caught his fist, twisted, and pinned his arm behind his back in a hold that made Bram yelp. "Enough," Damien said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a gunshot. He released Bram, who stumbled away, clutching his arm. The hounds were a mess. Koen dripping wet and furious. Jasper and Milo tangled in garbage. Finn wheezing, Bram cradling his wrist. And Damien? He stood there, breathing steady, not a mark on him. "You think this is over?" Koen spat, wiping blood from his chin. "You're dead, man. Dead!" Damien looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, Koen felt small. "I've been dead before," Damien said quietly. "You don't scare me." The alley was silent now, save for the patter of rain and the ragged breathing of the hounds. Damien Cole stood like a statue amidst the wreckage of their pride, his dark eyes scanning each of them in turn. The tattoos on his neck glistened under the streetlight, a map of scars and stories they couldn't begin to read. Koen, still on his knees, glared up at him, his hands balled into fists. The others hesitated, caught between fear and the need to save face. "You're a dead man," Koen growled again. But the threat sounded hollow now, a child's tantrum against a wall that wouldn't break. He pushed himself up, wincing as his bruised ego warred with his battered body. "You don't know who you're messing with." Damien tilted his head, studying Koen like a doctor examining a patient. "I know exactly who you are," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Kids playing tough because the world's been cruel. You think this?" He gestured to the alley, the knives, the blood on the ground. "Makes you strong. It doesn't." Jasper snorted, disentangling himself from Milo and the trash cans. "What the hell do you know, huh? You come strolling in here like you own the place, thinking you're better than us." "I don't think I'm better," Damien replied, his tone even. "I've just seen more." He took a step back, giving them space not out of fear, but as if he were offering them a way out. "Go home. Sleep it off." The twins exchanged another glance, uncertainty creeping into their bravado. Finn rubbed his stomach where Damien's elbow had landed, while Bram flexed his wrist, testing the pain. Milo picked up his switchblade from the wet ground, but his grip was shaky. Only Koen seemed unswayed, his anger burning hotter with every word Damien spoke. "You don't get to lecture us," Koen snapped, snatching his own knife from the puddle. "You're just some Bruin bastard who got lucky. We'll find you again. And next time—" "There won't be a next time," Damien cut in, his voice hardening for the first time. He didn't raise it. Didn't need to. The weight of it stopped Koen cold. "Not because I'll hurt you, because you'll figure out this ain't worth it." Koen lunged again, fueled by rage and humiliation, but Damien was ready. He sidestepped, grabbed Koen's arm, and twisted it behind his back in a fluid motion. Koen cried out, the knife slipping from his fingers once more. Damien held him there, not cruelly, but firmly, like a parent restraining a child mid-tantrum. "Listen to me," Damien said, his mouth close to Koen's ear. "I've killed men bigger than you. I've saved men better than you. I've held friends while they bled out in places you'll never see. You want to know what tough is? It's not this." He released Koen, shoving him forward just enough to make him stumble but not fall. Koen caught himself against the wall, panting, his face a mask of fury and confusion. The others watched, wide-eyed, as Damien stepped back again, hands returning to his pockets. "Why don't you just finish it?" Milo muttered, his voice trembling. "You could have snapped his neck. Why stop?" Damien's gaze softened, just for a moment. "Because I'm tired of breaking things," he said, "and you're not worth the effort." The words hung in the air, heavier than the rain. Koen turned, his chest heaving, but something in his eyes had shifted. A crack in the armor he'd built from years of resentment. The Hounds didn't move, didn't speak. They just stared at this man who'd dismantled them without even trying, who'd offered them mercy when they'd given him none. Damien adjusted his hood and started walking again, his boots echoing on the cobblestones. He didn't look back. He didn't. The Hounds let him go, their pride in tatters, their world suddenly smaller than it had been an hour ago. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Damien didn't stop until he reached a small, run-down bar 2 streets over. The sign above the door read "Desuan" in faded letters, and the windows were fogged with age and cigarette smoke. Inside it was warm and dim, the kind of place where people went to forget. He slid into a booth near the back, peeling off his wet hoodie to reveal a plain black t-shirt stretched tight over a muscled frame. The tattoos covered his arms fully now, names inked in careful script, dates that marked losses, a Marine Corps emblem faded but proud on his bicep. He ordered a beer, his first words since the alley, and sat in silence as the bartender slid it across the counter. The fight hadn't shaken him, not physically at least. He'd faced worse in Fallujah, in Kandahar, in places where the air tasted of dust and death. 5 punks with knives didn't compare to RPGs or roadside bombs, but their words, their hate, had stirred something he'd buried deep. Bruin, your kind. Echoes of a past he'd tried to outrun. Damien Cole was 38, a retired combat medic from the U.S. Marine Corps. He'd joined at 19, A kid from Chicago with a chip on his shoulder and a need to prove himself. 15 years later, he'd left with a chest full of medals and a mind full of ghosts. He'd saved lives, hundreds of them, patching up soldiers under fire, dragging them from burning Humvees, holding their hands as they slipped away. He'd taken lives, too, when he had to. War didn't care about color, but the world did. He'd felt it in the States, in the sidelong glances and whispered slurs. He'd felt it here, too, since moving to Europe 3 years ago, chasing a quiet life that never quite materialized. The beer was half gone when the door creaked open and Koen walked in. Alone. Damien didn't tense, didn't reach for a weapon he didn't carry anymore. He just watched as the younger man approached, his jacket soaked, his scar stark against his pale skin. Koen stopped a few feet from the booth, hands clenched at his sides. "You think you're some hero, huh?" Koen said, his voice quieter now, less sure. "Coming in here, acting like you're above us?" Damien took a slow sip of his beer, then set it down. "I don't think I'm anything," he said. "What do you want, Koen?" The use of his name caught Koen off guard. He blinked, then scowled. "How'd you—" "Never mind. I want answers. Who the hell are you?" Damien leaned back, considering. "Just a guy," he said. "Used to be a soldier, used to be a doctor. Now I'm just trying to live." Koen snorted, but there was no venom in it. "You fight like that and you're just a guy? Bullshit. You could have killed us back there. Why didn't you?" Damien's eyes met Koen's, steady and unyielding. "Because I've seen enough death. And because you're not my enemy, not really." Koen shifted, uncomfortable. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Damien said. "You're angry. You're scared. You think picking fights makes you somebody. I've met 100 kids like you, some in alleys, some on battlefields. Same story, different scars." Koen's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He pulled out a chair and sat, uninvited, across from Damien. The bar's hum faded into the background as the two men faced each other, an unspoken truce settling between them. "Why'd you come here?" Damien asked after a moment. Koen stared at the table, tracing a crack in the wood with his finger. "I don't know," he admitted. "The others, they're pissed. Want your head. But I couldn't let it go. What you said back there, it's stuck in my skull." Damien nodded, as if he'd expected this. "Good. Means you're thinking." Koen looked up, his eyes searching Damien's face. "You really kill people?" "Yeah," Damien said, no pride in it. "And I saved more than I killed. Doesn't balance out, though. Never does." Koen swallowed, the weight of that sinking in. "What's tough, then? If it ain't this," he gestured vaguely to himself, the bar, the life he knew. "What is it?" Damien leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Tough is waking up every day with blood on your hands and choosing not to add more. It's facing the shit you've done and still trying to be better. It's not about who you can beat. It's about what you can carry." Koen didn't respond right away. He just sat there, rain dripping from his hair. A kid who'd spent years building walls and was only now seeing the cracks. The bar clock ticked past 2 a.m. when Koen finally spoke again. "My dad used to say people like you were the problem," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said you come here, take our jobs, ruin our streets." I believed him. Damien didn't flinch. "And now?" Koen shrugged, a small, helpless gesture. "I don't know. You're not what I thought. That's the thing about hate, Damien said. It's easy, doesn't ask questions, but it's a lie. I've been where you are, blaming the world, picking fights. Didn't make me stronger, just made me tired. Koen's hands tightened into fists, then relaxed. So what do I do? Just let it go? Let you walk all over us? Nobody's walking over you, Damien said. You've got a choice. Keep swinging at shadows or figure out what you're really fighting for. I can't tell you what that is, but I can tell you it's not me. Koen stared at him, a storm of emotions flickering across his face. Anger, shame, something like hope. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I need to think, he muttered, and then he was gone, disappearing into the night. Damien finished his beer, left a few euros on the table, and stepped back into the rain. He didn't know if Koen would change, didn't know if any of them would. But he'd planted a seed, and that was enough for now. He'd learned long ago that you couldn't force redemption. You could only offer the path. The next morning, the Hounds met at their usual spot, an abandoned warehouse by the docks. Koen was quieter than usual, his scar hidden under a hood. The others grumbled about revenge, but he cut them off and, "Let it go," he said, his voice firm. "He's not worth it." Jasper scoffed. "You gone soft, Koen?" "Maybe," Koen replied, meeting their eyes. "Or maybe I'm just done being stupid, and they didn't push him." Something in his tone, his stance, told them he wasn't the same kid who'd led them into that alley. They dispersed, uncertain, the Hounds' unity fraying at the edges. Damien, meanwhile, walked the streets of Rotterdam, the city waking up around him. He passed a group of kids kicking a soccer ball, their laughter cutting through the gray. He smiled faintly, a rare thing, and kept going. He didn't know if he'd see Koen again, didn't know if the lesson would stick, but he'd given them a mirror, and what they did with it was up to them. The rain had stopped, and the sun peeked through the clouds, casting long shadows on the cobblestones. Damien adjusted his hood and disappeared into the crowd, a quiet man with a past too heavy to share and a future too open to predict. Somewhere behind him, a city, and maybe a few lives, shifted, just a little, toward something better.